Right now, I mean, literally as you were listening to this, miles beneath the freezing, pitch black waters of the Baltic Sea, there's a chance a massive commercial cargo ship is just dragging a multi-ton iron anchor across the ocean floor.
Yeah, and to the naked eye, or, to international maritime authorities, it just looks like a simple nautical accident, a vessel caught in bad weather.
Right, exactly. But the reality is actually terrifying because that dragging anchor is actively ripping through the fiber optic cables that carry your internet, your financial data, your secure communications. It's the new invisible front line of modern conflict.
It really is. It's this profound shift in how we need to understand global security today. I mean, the battlefield isn't just confined to muddy trenches or, tanks rolling across a field anymore. It is mutated into something that directly touches the infrastructure sustaining our everyday lives.
And deciphering that exact mutation is our mission for you today in this depth dive. We are pulling the most crucial insights from a massive stack of recent military analyses, NATO updates, and strategic think tank reports. Specifically, the latest comprehensive study from BASIC.
Right. And there's a lot to unpack there.
There is. But really quickly, before we dive into this, a quick reminder for you all. Our goal today is to impartially unpack the strategic concepts and findings presented in these Western think tank and NATO documents. We aren't here to endorse specific geopolitical stances or, take political sides.
Definitely not. We're just trying to break down the highly complex infrastructural realities that these military analysts are currently grappling with.
Exactly. We're just following the data. So let's look at the roadmap. We're going to start with how Ukraine is rewriting classic air power theory with cheap drones. Then we'll dive into the murky waters of hybrid warfare and submarine cable sabotage. And finally, look at how all these tensions are sort of boiling over into the melting Arctic.
It's a huge shift. And the overarching theme across all these documents, what military analysts are calling it, is systemic disruption.
Systemic disruption. Yeah.
Right. We are moving away from the historical metric of war, which was always, territorial conquest, and entering this era where the primary objective is to paralyze the complex systems your adversary relies on to function.
So let's start with the most active testing ground for this theory, which is Ukraine. For the past few years, the maps you see on the evening news are entirely focused on territory, right? They show who holds this specific town or who managed to cross that river.
Exactly. It's all about lines on a map.
Right. But reading through these defense analyses, it becomes clear that the underlying strategy is pivoting heavily toward this idea of systemic disruption. You don't just win by taking a field.
No, you don't. And the theory behind this actually has pretty deep historical roots. To understand what's happening today, you kind of have to look back to the 1930s. There was this concept developed by the Air Corps Tactical School called the industrial web theory.
The industrial web. Okay, what's the core of that?
The core premise was that a modern industrialized nation operates like a fragile web of interconnected nodes. So you have power generation, transportation logistics, heavy manufacturing.
So the idea being that you don't need to destroy the entire enemy army if you can just, destroy the one specific factory making the ball bearings for their tank treads.
Exactly. You find the ultimate bottlenecks. And the U.S. and its coalition partners actually executed this flawlessly during Operation Desert Storm back in 1991. They used these multi-billion-dollar fleets of stealth bombers, guided cruise missiles, and total air superiority to just systematically dismantle Iraq's infrastructural web.
Right, but reading through the reports from United 24 Media, the Ukrainian approach is attempting to achieve those exact same Desert Storm level effects, but on this unbelievable shoestring budget.
Yeah, it's incredible. They don't have total air superiority, and they certainly don't have fleets of stealth bombers.
No. They are doing this using domestically produced low-cost drones. I'm looking at the models mentioned, like the FP1 Firepoint and the RS1 Bars.
Those models are just a fascinating leap in asymmetric warfare. They're essentially mass-produced, uncrewed cruise missiles. But, the hardware is only half the equation here.
Right. The targeting is what really stuck out to me.
Yes. The real evolution is in the targeting. They are relying heavily on shared intelligence from the U.S. and France to map out Russian air defense networks.
So they find the gaps.
Exactly. They locate the radar blind spots, the gaps in coverage, and they program these cheap drones to thread the needle through those specific corridors.
And the targets themselves are so incredibly specific. I mean, they aren't just aiming for the general vicinity of a Russian oil refinery and hoping for a big explosion. The reports note they are specifically flying these drones into the fractionation towers.
It's just such a critical detail.
Let's break that down for a second, because I had to look this up. What makes a fractionation tower the ultimate bottleneck for an energy grid?
So a fractionation tower is basically the beating heart of a refinery. It is this massive vertical column that literally boils raw crude oil and separates it into usable components. Gasoline, diesel, aviation fuel.
I mean, without it.
Without that tower, crude oil is just useless, unrefined sludge. You can't put it in a tank or a jet.
Yeah.
And more importantly, these towers are highly complex, custom-built pieces of engineering. You cannot just order a replacement part off Amazon.
Right. It's not a quick fix.
No. If a drone takes out a fractionation tower, you don't stall production for a few days. You freeze that entire supply chain for months while highly specialized engineers try to rebuild it.
Wow, it really makes me think of a chess match, but instead of trying to outmaneuver your opponent's pieces to capture the king on the board, you just set fire to their chair and steal their chess clock.
That's a perfect analogy.
You are attacking their physical ability to even sit at the table and play the game. And the sources note that when the adversary finally manages to repair that fractionation tower, the drone operators just send another cheap unit to hit it again.
Right, because that repeated striking is the deliberate tactical choice. It's designed to maximize logistical friction and economic pain. And the ambition of this strategy is scaling up in ways that are forcing a global rethink of air defense.
Yeah, that brings us to Operation Spiderweb from June of 2025. This operation really stood out in the stack of reports.
It was a massive wake-up call.
We're talking about a strike deep inside Russian territory, targeting massive Tu-95 bombers on an airbase. These are the heavy, strategic bombers used to launch cruise missiles. How on earth does a relatively slow, low-cost drone manage to bypass layers of military air defense to take out a strategic bomber sitting on a runway?
It all comes down to terrain masking and waypoint navigation. By flying incredibly low to the ground and utilizing those intelligence-mapped blind spots we discussed, a swarm of small drones can completely evade traditional radar.
Because the radar's looking up, right?
Exactly. Traditional radar is designed to look for high-flying jets or incoming ballistic missiles. It's not looking for something the size of a lawnmower hugging the tree line. The logic is brutal but effective. Why wait for the arrows to hit your cities when you can just destroy the archer while he's sleeping?
That is wild. But, you know, if a swarm of $500 drones can successfully navigate to an airbase and destroy a multi-million-dollar bomber, that raises a massive question for the West.
It absolutely does.
Doesn't this completely invalidate the way NATO builds its militaries? I mean, we spend decades and billions of dollars developing these exquisite, hyper-advanced fighter jets and massive aircraft carriers. Are those platforms just sitting ducks now?
That is the exact dilemma keeping military analysts awake at night right now. The consensus in the reports isn't that advanced platforms are entirely obsolete, but rather that technology is aggressively reconfiguring how industrial warfare must be fought. We are entering an era dictated by what they call the economy of repetition.
Economy of repetition, meaning mass over sophistication.
Yes. It doesn't matter if you have the most technologically advanced air defense system in the world if the enemy can simply overwhelm it by sending 2,000 incredibly cheap drones at once.
Because your multi-million-dollar interceptor missiles will just run out long before their cheap drones do.
Exactly. Yeah. The math heavily favors the attacker in this scenario. Retired General Glenn Van Herk, he's the former head of NORAD, he actually issued a stark warning regarding this exact vulnerability.
Oh, what did he say?
He pointed out that U.S. air bases, both domestically and abroad, are heavily guarded against traditional threats. But they remain highly susceptible to these low-flying, saturating drone swarms.
So the whole paradigm has to shift.
Right. The lesson for NATO analysts is that future defense strategies cannot rely solely on a few exquisite platforms. They must integrate affordable, mass-produced defensive systems, things like directed energy weapons, or even deploying their own drone swarms, just to ensure the survival of their high-end assets.
It's just wild how this concept of mass overriding sophistication is fundamentally mutating the battlefield itself. I mean, the NATO arbates describe the modern front line as a highly lethal no man's land.
It really is, because of the sheer volume of sensors now available.
Right, the aerial surveillance drones, acoustic sensors, signal intelligence interceptors. The battlefield has become practically transparent.
Yeah, the element of surprise at a tactical level is nearly gone. If a commander attempts to concentrate forces, like gathering tanks or infantry for a traditional armored push, that concentration is instantly detected by a drone and targeted by long-range artillery within minutes.
And this transparency is forcing structural changes, isn't it? The reports highlight how Ukraine is actually moving away from the modern, nimble brigade-level structure.
They are. They're reverting to an older, heavier, Corps-level army structure.
Really? Why go backwards?
Simply to manage the massive logistical nightmare and the constant troop rotations required to survive in a prolonged war of infrastructural attrition. A brigade just burns out too fast under that level of constant, transparent surveillance and strike capability.
That makes sense. And we see this systemic disruption extending well beyond land warfare, too. Without a traditional navy, Ukraine has essentially denied Russia the use of the Black Sea.
Which is incredible when you think about it.
They're using explosive-laden naval drones to hunt warships. The analysts refer to this as a modern return of privateering. They aren't trying to control the sea lanes to move their own ships, they are just making the waters too dangerous for their adversary to operate.
And this brings us to a really critical transition point in the analyses. If prioritizing mass over sophistication creates such a massive vulnerability for static, expensive military targets like warships and air bases, we have to look at the infrastructure that is even more exposed.
Right. The ultimate target for systemic disruption isn't above ground, and it isn't strictly military.
No, it's not.
You are talking about the invisible digital infrastructure at the bottom of the ocean, submarine cables.
Yes.
I was looking at the statistics in the basic report, and they are difficult to fully wrap your head around. Over 99% of all international data traffic and nearly 90% of global financial transactions flow through these underwater cables.
It's staggering. We think of the cloud as being up in the sky, but the cloud is actually lying exposed on the seabed.
And a massive concentration of that critical infrastructure lies in the Baltic Sea. Geopolitically, the Baltic is frequently referred to as a NATO lake, right? Because nearly every surrounding nation is a NATO member now.
Right, especially with Sweden and Finland joining. But the reports emphasize that this body of water is highly contested and incredibly vulnerable to gray zone tactics.
I found myself wondering while reading this, how do adversaries actually attack these cables? Are they firing sophisticated torpedoes at the seabed, like some James Bond villain?
No, the reality is far lower tech and honestly much harder to police. They use anchor dragging.
Anchor dragging.
Yeah. A commercial vessel enters a designated no anchor zone, drops its massive anchor, and simply continues sailing. It just drags the iron along the seabed for miles. It shreds fiber optic data cables and gas pipelines alike.
Just tears right through them.
Exactly. And when confronted, the ship's crew can simply claim it was a mechanical failure or they were caught in rough weather and didn't realize they were dragging it.
It is the ultimate weapon of plausible deniability. I mean, it's like a guy driving a bulldozer through your neighborhood, ripping up the power lines and the internet cables and claiming he accidentally dropped his shovel, and then he just keeps driving around, accidentally dropping the shovel again and again.
That's exactly what it's like. And legally and politically, countering an accident is incredibly complex, and the incidents are piling up at an alarming rate.
Yeah, the reports listed quite a few.
In 2023, the Chinese-flagged container ship Nunu Polar Bear severed the Baltic Connector pipeline and data cables. Then in 2024, a vessel called the Eagle S dragged its anchor for 90 kilometers, cutting the S-Link 2 cable. And then you had the Vizin incident in 2025.
The Eagle S was specifically flagged in the reports as being linked to a shadow fleet. Let's unpack that term because it keeps popping up in these maritime security briefs. What exactly constitutes a shadow fleet?
So a shadow fleet consists of older, often poorly maintained commercial vessels that operate outside of standard maritime regulations. They are frequently unregistered, they lack proper international insurance, and they often use tactics like spoofing their automatic identification systems.
Spoofing, meaning they fake their location.
Yeah, essentially faking their GPS coordinates to hide their true locations. They're primarily used to bypass international sanctions, transporting oil or goods covertly. But because they operate in this legal gray area, they are perfect tools for plausible deniability operations like anchor dragging.
And it isn't just commercial vessels having convenient accidents. The Royal United Services Institute analysis points to highly specialized, state-sponsored threats, specifically from Russia's GUGI, which stands for the Main Directorate for Deep-Sea Research.
Right. The name sounds like a benign oceanographic institute, but it is one of the most secretive military units in the world.
What do they actually do?
They operate specialized surface spy ships. like the Yantar, which deploy deep-water submersibles. But more concerning are their deep-diving nuclear-powered submarines, like the Belgorod or the Losharik.
Okay, so these aren't your typical attack subs.
No, these aren't standard attack subs. They're essentially motherships designed to crawl along the seafloor. They physically interact with, tap, or sever communications infrastructure at extreme depths where we can't easily monitor them.
Why focus so heavily on severing cables in the Baltic rather than targeting a military installation? The analysis suggests it's a strategy of escalation management.
Escalation management, right?
If an adversary wants to send a warning to NATO or inflict economic pain, they don't need to launch a missile, which would instantly trigger an Article 5 collective defense response.
Exactly. That would mean full-scale war.
Right. Instead, they can just sever a few cables, disrupt the European banking sector for a week, cause widespread panic, and shrug their shoulders, daring the West to prove it was an act of war.
It's brilliantly cynical. And the tactical success of these gray zone operations in the Baltic is now spilling over into a much larger and significantly more unforgiving environment.
The Arctic.
The Arctic North. The basic report dedicates a substantial portion of its analysis to this region.
The geography up there is fundamentally changing. As climate change rapidly melts the polar ice caps, the Northern Sea route is opening up, and this route drastically cuts the shipping time between Asia and Europe.
It's a huge economic shift.
Yeah, suddenly you have a massive geopolitical rush for untapped natural resources, new global trade arteries, and strategic military positioning.
And historically, the Arctic has housed critical early warning radars, strategic bomber bases, and the largest concentration of ballistic missile submarines. But despite this heavy militarization, it was long considered a region of low tension and high diplomatic cooperation.
Until recently.
Right. Following the 2022 invasion of Ukraine, that diplomacy completely froze.
The A7, so that's the 7 Western Arctic nations, including the U.S., Canada, and the Nordic countries, they paused all official cooperation with Russia within the Arctic Council. But wait, looking at the long-term geopolitical board, doesn't shutting them out entirely carry a massive risk?
How so?
Well, if the West completely isolates a weakened Russia in the Arctic, aren't we essentially forcing them to turn to Beijing for the capital and technology needed to develop the Northern Sea route? It seems like that diplomatic freeze is actively building the Sino-Russian Arctic partnership that NATO analysts desperately want to avoid.
It's a really valid point. And the authors of the basic report raise that exact concern. A complete diplomatic vacuum creates a highly volatile security environment. If Russia feels encircled and isolated, the likelihood of a minor misunderstanding escalating into a major conflict skyrockets.
Right.
So to mitigate these future risks, the report outlines several unconventional diplomatic strategies.
They strongly advocate for engaging non-Arctic states, right? Specifically pulling nations like China and India into international risk reduction frameworks so they are invested in the region's stability rather than acting as disruptive spoilers.
Exactly. But the most intriguing solution they propose is something called Track 2 diplomacy.
What does that actually look like in practice? Because government-to-government communication is frozen, so who is talking?
Track 2 diplomacy relies on informal, unofficial channels. Instead of sending diplomats and generals, you facilitate dialogues between academics, scientists, and non-governmental organizations.
Okay, so what are they discussing if they aren't negotiating treaties?
In the Arctic, the report suggests focusing these informal talks on human security for indigenous populations, sustainable resource management, tracking fish stocks, climate adaptation, things like that. It maintains a vital line of communication on shared challenges, ensuring that a total blackout doesn't lead to disastrous miscalculations. The report also suggests the eventual establishment of a dedicated Arctic Risk Reduction Center.
Essentially a red telephone for the Arctic. So when a submarine inevitably bumps into something, or an autonomous drone goes off course in the ice, there is a mechanism to talk the situation down before someone assumes it's an attack.
Right, because up there, a mistake could be catastrophic.
But while the diplomats figure out how to talk, how is NATO actually planning to protect thousands of miles of physical cable across the Baltic and the Arctic? It seems impossible to police every inch of the seabed.
It does seem impossible, but this is where we see some incredibly innovative adaptation. NATO has established a new coordination cell within their Brussels headquarters specifically tasked with monitoring critical undersea infrastructure.
Okay.
They've also set up a dedicated security center within the Maritime Command in Northwood, over in the UK, to coordinate naval patrols. But the real game changer is their new partnership with the private sector.
Because NATO doesn't actually own the internet cables, right? Private telecommunications companies do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And those private companies have incredibly sensitive sensors built directly into the fiber optic lines to monitor data flow and power transmission. When a cable is physically stressed, say, by a dragging anchor, the light signal inside the fiber degrades.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the private internet service providers can detect that pressure change and pinpoint the exact location of the fault almost instantly.
So by instantly sharing that diagnostic data with military commands, NATO navies can strip away the plausible deniability.
Precisely. You can't claim you had a mechanical issue and didn't realize your anchor was dragging if a Naval Patrol aircraft intercepts your vessel with precise sensor data 3 minutes after the cable snaps.
That is brilliant. It is a perfect example of how future defense strategies must integrate civilian infrastructure monitoring with military response capabilities. The military just can't do it alone anymore.
No, they can't. It has to be a hybrid defense against a hybrid threat.
Pulling all of these threads together, the deep dive through these sources reveals a stark new reality. Whether we are looking at the mud of Ukraine, the seabed of the Baltic, or the melting ice of the Arctic, the anatomy of war has fundamentally mutated.
It really has.
It is no longer defined strictly by armies taking territory. It is defined by systemic disruption.
It is the era of infrastructural attrition. We're in a world where a $500 drone can freeze an energy supply chain by hitting a fractionation tower, and a shadow fleet vessel can disrupt a nation's banking sector with a dragged anchor. The front lines are literally everywhere now.
And that leads to a final provocative thought I want to leave you with today. If warfare has evolved to directly target the critical infrastructure sustaining our daily lives, our power grids, our internet cables, our global supply chains, what does that mean for the psychological resilience of the average citizen?
It blurs the line between civilian and combatant in a deeply unsettling way.
It does. Think about it. When every unexplained power outage in your city, every sudden internet dropout, or every major delay in shipping could potentially be an act of gray zone warfare by a foreign state, the ultimate target might not actually be the physical infrastructure at all.
The target becomes the public's perception of stability itself.
Exactly. The real objective of systemic disruption is to erode our collective sanity and destroy our trust in the very systems that hold modern society together. And that is a battlefield that isn't drawn on any map. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the changing face of global conflict. As this new era of warfare continues to evolve, remember that staying informed and understanding the mechanics behind the headlines is the best armor you can have. Catch you next time.